Welcome to Grain IQ, an original production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. I'm Chad Moyer. Grain IQ is brought to you in part by the Nebraska Soybean Board and your soybean checkoff. As over the last few years, they have helped us put together this group of podcasts that talks a lot about grain marketing and some of that book knowledge that you need when it comes to marketing grain. And we know how important the world market has become to the grain marketer, and not only grain but livestock as well. And what does that world market look like in the future? That's what we're going to try and tackle on today's Grain IQ podcast. And we're going to talk with some folks from Terrain. Join with us today, Matt Clark. Matt is the interim executive head for Terrain, and also with him is Don Close. Don is the senior animal protein analyst for Terrain. Matt, Don, thank you so much for joining us here today. Good to have you on the podcast.
You're more than welcome.
Thanks to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you much. Well, Don, I think we're going to start with you and maybe just a quick background for folks that don't know what Terrain is. Terrain is a partner with a number of the farm credit associations across the country, right? Just give us a quick background of that connection.
Right. So about 4 years ago, a group of farm credit associations got together and thought, we would like to have more information for our farm credit customers to keep them better informed and make them better marketers. So that group of associations got together. At that point in time, they asked me, can you put this group together? And we spent about a year filling out all of the behind the scenes components that are required, hiring a group of analysts. And we put it together, and we've been fully operational for 3 years now. And the list of markets we cover: grain and oil seeds, animal protein, farm and macroeconomics, dairy, tree nuts, specialty crops, and viniculture and wine.
All right. So, Matt, your perspective over these 3 years that this partnership has been going, how has this benefited the associations and the farmers that are a member of those farm credit systems?
Oh, great question. If I were to step back and just think about the best thing, it's when if we're talking about Nebraska, for example, Farm Credit Services of America is one of our original founders. My favorite thing is when one of their relationship managers and we go out, we meet farmers, talk about their operation, talk about, hey, what are the challenges that you're facing? What are we seeing from the financial side? That's the RM. What am I seeing from more of the grain, the marketing side, the macro side? What am I seeing from interest rate side? We sit down just to have a conversation about optimizing business. And it's that simple. I know that sounds cliche, but frankly, that's where the big value is. And we do things too. I mean, that's an individualized approach. We of course do larger things where we're putting stuff out on the internet for consumption, for kind of everybody's consumption. But the real benefits where we get to sit down with farmers and have one-on-one conversations about real business decisions that make a difference on their farm.
Okay. Well, let's get into a recent project that Terrain has undertaken, and it's really a look forward to the next 50, 60 years beyond that. It's called The Big Shrink. Don, maybe you would be best to kind of give us a little bit of background. We're always looking forward, right? We're always trying to position ourselves so that we can take advantage of what would be coming our way in the future. So a little bit of background, this project called The Big Shrink, how did it get started?
So it started from observations, and the very first version or first draft of this was a presentation that I gave at NCBA Cattleman College that was 3 years ago. And what we were looking at is, as we see trade both in grains, but even more and more so on the livestock side, as being dependent on imports and exports. We look, okay, what are the dynamics going on there? And specifically, we looked at contracting population numbers in China. We looked at the long contracting population numbers of Japan, pretty much Australia. But then we got to looking at contracting numbers across Europe, even before the Ukraine-Russia conflict escalated to the point that it is at. So we first looked at population trends of every country in the world, and it was just overwhelming. So then we took every country or all the continents and looked at that net population growth by continent and what that will mean over time. And through several stops and starts, that ultimately led us to where we're at with the big shrink and looking at it more in a digestible or holistic form.
Matt, would you say that this project and the data that it put out there, it feels like it's really different maybe than what other information would be out there? Do you think this is and I don't know, I'm sure that's not that was the intention, but it feels like it's a different way of looking at marketing in the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, to your point, this isn't what's the price going to be tomorrow kind of story. This is a thought of, hey, we're in a paradigm right now. And we've been in a paradigm for a pretty long time, several decades of feed the world, exports, fence row to get the exports. If you want to go all the way back to kind of the Earl Butz thing that led into this, we've been in that paradigm, right? We think the next paradigm is going to look different. It's not going to be the same story of we got to grow as much as we can to feed the world because there's this ever growing pie of demand. We think it's going to look different. And that's not, maybe all that novel. Every paradigm shift is different, but we think this paradigm shift is going to focus less on bulk exporting and more on not only domestic production, but domestic consumption, high quality consumption, and maybe even some shifts in what we grow, where we grow it. We think that's the next big paradigm. And really we're targeting it at farmers that are thinking about how do I pass on what I have today to the next generation? Because it may seem, if you go through our research, we're talking about 2065 is kind of maybe a tipping point that just as a number to throw out there. That's not that far away. That's the next generation's issue that they're going to have to work through.
Sure. Now, Matt, you said a paradigm shift. Could you point to in the last 50 or 100 years, just so that we kind of have an understand of what that means? What would be paradigm shifts that we've seen in our recent past, let's say in the last 100 years?
Yeah. Great question. So if you think early 1900s, had a very sort of very agrarian, wasn't a global economy, right? We're growing what we needed, very small farms, makes sense. You come out of World War II, however, now suddenly we're entering this globalization phase, right? We're starting to think more about big picture type economics, macro environments. How does trade work? Big picture. You start coming through some of these alliances. And then, fast forward a few years, we have this kind of I know it comes with some negative connotations, but you've got Earl Butz's famous fence row to fence row. He's really, if you go back and read a lot of his transcripts, he's really the first person that's saying, hey, produce as much as you can because we can export a huge amount. So as you kind of go through there, and we had the difficult 70s and 80s, but if you look at a graph of exports, whether it's by dollars or by volume amount, it's really been a beautiful thing for the U.S. ag economy. I mean, we have exported a ton of our product. We've grown our farms. We've done a great job truly of meeting that mantra of feed the world, which was a common thing that you would hear in the 90s, even just me growing up, globalization and feed the world. That was really that last big paradigm. We think the next, few years is probably going to continue on that, but we're slowly going to shift more into some of these other ideas. And frankly, if you just, a tease of that was some of the RFS, the renewable fuels standards was a tease of this idea that, hey, maybe forever it's not bulk exports. It's going to be something different. And you're going to see more and more of that slowly leaking in as kind of our big picture view.
Sure, absolutely. And you and I were talking, before we went on the air here, who thought that we could do the amount of business we do with China? Who thought that at one point, 50, 60, 70 years ago, that Japan would import as much red meat from the U.S. as they do. We see those customers come about periodically like they have, right?
Yeah. I made the analogy, and Don can talk on the beef side, but I made the analogy that, look, if we were in eastern Nebraska in the 1950s and went to a farm and, we're in or just coming out of the Korean conflict, and we say, hey, in 50 years, half of your acres are going to be soybeans, and we're going to export those to China, South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Japan. No one would believe us, right? No one would believe that. I wouldn't have believed us. And now look where we're at, right? Now every farmer can tell you more about globalization and trade flow than your average person anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I think we've done a good job of setting up where the idea for this report came from. So let's dig into the data. Don, we'll come back to you. If you could give like an overarching idea. So when you did the study, when you finally published the big shrink, and I understand this is kind of an ongoing thing, but the information that has come out so far, what are the main takeaways, or what are the main bullet points of the big shrink study so far, Don?
So the number one thing I would say is that when we look at the rate of declining populations in key components of the world, the first takeaway is simply we are not going to need the bulk quantity of foodstuffs in the future that we need today. As populations contract, excuse me, I'm thinking specifically China here, but it enables them to produce a larger percentage of their total food supplies, makes them less reliant on imports. Same could be said for Japan. I think we're seeing, a lot of the environmental policy, but the contracting trade volumes with Europe. So the start of this was, as global population contracts, we're simply not going to need the quantities of bulk commodities that we have needed in the future. And as a result of that, that's going to ultimately lead to a different distribution of acres as to what is planted. But it's also going to be some very different trade flows. It's going to make the U.S. way more escalate the need to produce more commodities at home. So that's kind of a quick overview of the initial thought.
So, Don, I think we need to spend some time on this idea about a contracting world population, because we've been told as farmers that we need to feed a growing population, 9 billion by 2050, I think it was. Yes. Well, it's not far beyond that you're saying that the world population isn't going to continue expanding. It's actually going to shrink. What are you basing that on? What data is out there that is indicating that the world's population is going to stop growing?
All right. So the real number we're looking at there is the natural fertility rate. And that is the number of births for childbearing females. And sustainability on any population is a fertility rate of 2.1 children per female. If you look at specific countries, the U.S. is currently below 2. China is, you hear estimates, it's as low as 0.8. Japan is currently at 1.5. Europe is below 2. So when you look at those fertility rates and you look at the percentage of the existing population aging out, but we don't have a sufficient number of new births or new population coming in the backside. So it makes a heavier dependence on that contracting workforce to support the population of elderly adults that are still around, still consuming, but no longer in the workforce. So that's the core number that this whole thing is driven from.
Okay. So very important number. And I know that's kind of where you're planting your stake to make these estimates. But Matt, are there other things that might contribute to this? Technology or new uses being new ways of growing food in other parts of the world. Like I think Don said something before, maybe countries becoming more self-sufficient. Are there other things that are in play in this idea as well?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a number of different things that are at play here. We could see large infrastructure investments in countries that are currently large importers of food. Possibly you could have some of those scenarios too, where they're growing a larger share of their own food. There is also the other side of this. Maybe something changes in fertility rates. We're pretty doubtful of that. There's been very large scale efforts in most developed countries to try to increase fertility rates. And frankly, it's just hard. There will be maybe some offset from rising incomes. But again, there is just frankly speaking, and most people in ag understand there is just a certain amount of calories people can eat total. And so at some point, even if people have more money, there's an offset there for a while because they can eat more and get closer to that capacity. But at some point you hit capacity. And kind of the big shrink would argue that we're going to hit capacity somewhere out there. And when that happens, to Don's point, you really see that shrinking need, and that pie is no longer growing for everybody. It starts shrinking. And at that point, U.S. ag will look very, very different.
Sure. All right. Well, so let's bring this down to the farmer level now. What does this mean for the farmer in Nebraska, the Great Plains, even here in the United States? Again, like we've said before, that there's a lot of our agriculture that depends upon exports and getting grains, livestock, those calories to other parts of the world. So Don, let's start with you on the livestock side. If we take these concepts of a big shrink, maximum world population around 2065, what does that mean for the livestock sector?
So one interesting conversation that has been going on in the livestock space is, and you often hear the challenges that producers have in finding new grass or of the availability of leases to expand the cow herd if they wanted to. And one of the offshoots of the big shrink, as we see the demand for conventional row crops contract, I don't necessarily think we're going to see a big acreage shift in Iowa and Nebraska and the I states of the core corn belt. But if you take the amount of corn and soybeans grown in those peripheral areas, I think those acres will ultimately contract. That in turn, I think before this is over with, we will actually see grass and total grazable acres increase that will enable us to see an increased cow numbers in the country.
And so, follow up to that: what about the other proteins? Is the main benefit going to be to cattle? But would hogs, would chickens, or other proteins be affected by some of these things that you're talking about?
They absolutely will. And if you take, I think it's safe to say the U.S. and globally, currently we are seeing an absolute protein craze. The demand for protein has been phenomenal. So we need to take a look. Is that a short-term trend, short-term fad kind of thing? Or as these incomes increase, you've got fewer total population, the distribution of available dollars enables us all to eat better, which theoretically, the first thing is, as someone's income rises, the first thing they do is eat better, specifically with higher protein levels. So, to answer your question, I think it's uniquely supportive to cattle and beef, but I think it is equally supportive to the other protein sources as well.
Okay. Matt, let's come back to you and talk about the grains, impact to grains. So again, ideas of the big shrink, a world population that is going to start contracting about 2065, around there. What does that mean for grain production, corn and soybeans here in the United States?
Yeah, three ideas. If you're a farmer out there, I have kind of three big picture things. Number one, in the short term, it's going to, I think, actually emphasize the importance of getting good trade deals, finding new partners. If you're thinking about a contraction, it means in the short run, that actually means we need to really position ourselves well. So if you're thinking about it big picture, in the short run, I think it really emphasizes the point of getting good trade deals, finding new export partners, really establishing those partnerships, because that demand or that stress to get those deals is going to increase. Number two, and kind of that intermediate run, I think it really, really puts more emphasis on thinking about how do we take our current commodities, how do we turn them into a higher value product, consume that higher value product here, but also export the higher value product. So I gave a tease earlier. I think the renewable fuel standard was sort of a tip of this, going from exporting bulk corn, whatever, 20-ish%. Now it's much lower, 12, 15%. We export a lot of the ethanol or a lot of the byproducts of that higher value, consuming it here. I think the same is going to be true for soy oil, soy crush. That build out is kind of that same idea. I think in the intermediate, that's clearly the path that we're going to head on. And then lastly, I think kind of the intermediate to long-term piece, and you see some of this in Western Nebraska now, you'll see some acres, I don't want to say switch, but you'll see some acreage changes. For example, already in Nebraska, I run into a lot of people that are growing white corn. Some of them are doing organic white corn, right? Again, not all their farm, but they're trying it out on some acres. You see some people trying blue corn. That's not a big shift in terms of going from yellow number 2 to this, but it's a mentality shift of, hey, maybe I can change some of my acres to meet a demand niche that has a higher return. Same thing too with dry beans, dry peas. You've seen that really in Western Nebraska start to shift. I think you see some of these experiments over the kind of intermediate term that in the long run may end up being not the majority of our acreage by far, but may have a more prominent role for most farms.
Don, how is terrain presenting this information? In other words, because I was perusing the Terrain Ag website here before, and you've kind of broken it down, right? So if we've intrigued people's interest in this, how can we read up on it? How is it presented? Things like that.
Great question. Thank you for asking. So our website is terrainag.com. And we invite people to go to the website. All of our reports are available there. They can also, for those that are farm credit customers, they can get in touch with their farm credit representative, and they can access our material through the website of Farm Credit Services of America or American Ag Credit and the various Farm Credit Association. But so the first thing I'd say, terrainag.com.
Yep. And Matt, I think I said it before that this is, there are some modules out, right? You've tackled different pieces in these concepts. You're not done with it, right? I get the impression that there's more that's going to come out on this in the future, right?
Yeah, great point. So we've tackled this in a really big picture. Why do we think that there's this kind of fundamental shift going on? We've tackled it for grains. We've talked a little bit about dairy. We've talked about tree nuts. Coming forth, I think the big question is how much can income offset? That's kind of what we're working on now. Kind of a longer term idea of how many calories are out there, how many are really available, regardless of income. Can we actually get to a point where total consumption declines globally? And what does that mean for ag? So I think that's kind of what's coming out. We're not done with it. As you can imagine, we're trying to take our time with this. We're trying to be careful. We're trying to think through it really logically, not just from an academic standpoint, but does this make sense? Does this make sense from a demography standpoint? Does this make sense from a farmer standpoint? So this isn't something that we're trying to publish out every week. We're not doing that. This is a big term project that we're thoughtfully putting out as we have the availability of data and thoughtfulness to put into it.
Sure. All right. I've got a couple of questions here that I want both of you to respond to as we kind of wrap up here. Well, actually three. So, these are big, you said before, these are big concepts. These are big ideas looking a long ways down the road. Matt, what about this project or information that you've uncovered that we haven't talked about? What else is important? What about these ideas do you think farmers should know?
Yeah. Well, my journey has been different because I didn't believe Don when he first started working on this. So I've come a long ways, just to be blunt. I would say this, when I talk to farmers, the number one thing I try to tell them, this is not doom and gloom. There's always going to be paradigm shifts in ag and any business. This isn't doom and gloom. What's important to do is just to step back, be open, and think about, okay, I want to transition my farm to the next generation and the generation after that. You think about, you're in Nebraska, think about the number of century farms in Nebraska. It's incredible. We want to see 2-century farms and more. So what I tell farmers is come into this with an agnostic view, think about it from a big picture. And if you think that we have the right idea, or at least we're directionally right, step back and think about, okay, how do I position myself, whatever that looks like, so that in 40 or 50 years, I'm making the necessary adjustments kind of over time, slow creep over time, so I can transition this farm in a healthy way. I mean, we talk about all the time, if you have a 20-year mortgage on a piece of land that you go buy, well, that's 2046 right now. It's a 30-year mortgage, that's 2056. Well, this is knocking on the doorstep. So start thinking about it now, be agnostic to it, be open to it, start thinking about the little things you can do to position yourself.
Yeah. Expand on that more, Don. What do you think? How should farmers use information like this? How do they take it and put it to work in their operation?
So the real core, one of the core views that Terrain was built on is we're trying to look at market issues and dynamics that we're not necessarily, while it's part of our responsibility, the price of a fed steer next Friday, the real core of Terrain is we're trying to think of topics that will influence that farm 1, 3, 5 years down the road. And if we can provide customers with that view to make small adjustments over time to land in that sweet spot for the long run, that's really what we're targeting. To put that in more of a real-time perspective, I think we would all quickly agree with U.S. policy, global policy, we're going through a period of extreme isolationism. And I don't want to confuse. I think what we're seeing currently is an offshoot of contracting population numbers globally. But I don't want to get caught up in the short-term politics of isolationism to what it means for the changing demand for different products long-term.
Yeah. All right. Final question for both of you, and then we'll wrap up the podcast for today. Matt, would you say the big shrink, the information that's been put out there, is it positive or negative, and why?
No, it's neither. I mean, it's not negative ag. We're not pessimistic ag one bit, one iota. I mean, anyone on Terrain is going to be, for the most part, we're not only, we have the FFA creed in our mind. We believe in the future bag. We're ready to roll. Yep. Okay. And we believe that true going forward. It's just simply suggesting that, look, the way we operate today is going to look different 30, 40 years down the road. How do you start thinking about that now so that you're not the person that's stuck behind the wheel trying to figure out what to do when the market's already shifted underneath you? And so it's not negative, and it's not like we're super overly wrongly bullish on something. It's simply trying to Don's point, how do you make good business decisions for the long run? Yep. So it's information for your business decision and long-term thinking. Throw it in front of your board, your group, over the kitchen table, start talking about it.
Well, that's the best thing that you can do is take that information and talk about it, right? Digest it, right. See what it means for your operation, huh?
That's right.
All right. Don, Matt, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Appreciate your time very much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Again, Matt Clark and Don Close with Terrain joining us on today's Grain IQ podcast. Again, they've got a website where this concept is laid out, where you can read up more on it. Terrainag.com is the website. And again, you can see their most recent information they put out called The Big Shrink. Thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast of Grain IQ. Again, we have prior seasons able for download wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you listen to those. And again, hit that notification button and I'll let you know when the next Grain IQ program comes out. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week ahead. We'll see you next time on Grain IQ.